arguably the greatest work of philosophy. Um, it is full of, just the greatest interest because of the witness of a man to a mission that is so transcending of the ways of the world, a new way of life, the way of philosophy that is profoundly contrary to the ways of life that are laid before us by the social script of any given culture. We've studied already, we've talked about the emergence of philosophy in the Greek-speaking world a couple of centuries before Socrates. We've considered why the emergence of this new way of questioning, this logos instead of mythos, as a way of asking about the meaning of existence, why that was such an important advance in the history of the human spirit. With Socrates, something changes in the trajectory of philosophy. Instead of pursuing the logos in terms of natural philosophy, in terms of what we moderns would think of as science, philosophy with him goes into the marketplace, goes into conversation, goes into the great conversation, goes into dialectic, is the fancy word, conversational inquiry, Neolinkus, which is his method of asking what is a thing, and then probing to see if his interlocutor has as much knowledge about the thing as he thinks. So this immersion, this descending into the common way of thinking and speaking, which Aristotle himself will carry on in his own fashion. And this is Socrates who introduces this dynamism into human existence, and that it's a thing of great beauty. I think I'm overwhelmed by the existential witness of Socrates as presented by Plato in the Apology. As you know, apology doesn't mean I'm sorry. It means a defense. It's a legal defense, and it is in fact a full dress defense of the way of life that is Socratic philosophizing. That is to pursue truth no matter the cost. One way of thinking about the text is to I'll be a little controversial here as far as the critical literature on it. I don't believe that calling Socrates an ironist in the way that that was originally meant as a term, ironia, meaning to be ironic was to have an intent to deceive. I find that completely false. And indeed, so we'll have, I think, probably a pretty vigorous conversation on this. I don't find anything esoteric about what Socrates is saying here. I find it as when he says he's saying the whole truth, I don't think he's being ironic. I think he's, in fact, telling us the whole truth. Now, what he tells us is something we have to think about, which is the point of philosophy, is to think. He is saying new things about divinity. He's saying something that is extremely different, and that is that his daimonion, that little divine thing that is his somehow, present to him, moving him, guiding him, that moves the horizon of transcendence to the personal, and that seems to me significant, in a way parallel to emergence of the differentiation of monotheism in Israel. We have this horizon of a God who is above all gods, but is also at the same time most intimate to each of us. I see an analogous kind of insight here with Socrates. So that's going to be one of those debates. There are those who argue that Socrates, in fact, is an atheist, that he is, in fact, impious in exactly the ways that Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon are charging him with. I don't find that plausible at all, but it would be very good to have a vigorous discussion about that. I find his description, Socrates' description of standing at his post, given the divine commission that he's received, that is the Delphic oracle. So you have the Pythia, the high priestess of Apollo, there giving oracular and responses, that is, puzzling responses often to questions posed to her in the name of Apollo. And when Chaerephon, the friend of Socrates, asks, is Socrates the wisest? And the answer comes back, he is. That sets about the mission, right? That Socrates, who seems to have started out pursuing, like the pre-Socratics, the natural philosophical questions about scientific causality. As he says here, there's a popular caricature of him as exploring the things, the things that the physical scientists, the physical philosophers are exploring under the earth and so on, but also that he was like the orators in making the weaker argument stronger. These are the bases, of course, of Aristophanes's caricature of him in the clouds, and that's Aristophanes is the name that is adduced to represent the caricature, the popular caricature on which the accusers of Socrates are able to base the power of their writ of impiety against him. And so he's explaining, he's giving a full defense of his whole life. It's an apologia pro vita sua, right? It is a complete defense of the Socratic life. And he's saying this is divinely commissioned. It is something that has to do with the skepticism he had come to in his natural philosophical studies, that somehow he knew he didn't know, and that's what the Pythia pointed to in saying that's wisdom. And then he went into his conversational career of the dialectic of the Neolinkus of asking everybody, and this is very democratic of him. He would ask anybody in the agora who would have him. He would just talk. He would have these speeches, and if he found someone who'd be willing to have his expertise on virtue questioned, then he would go at it. What Socrates does make clear is he doesn't believe that he or basically anybody else has an expert craft knowledge of virtue. That is knowledge any artisan has who's any good has an expertise in that art, right? A harness maker has an expertise in making harnesses. Socrates does seem to be saying that it does not seem to be anyone who has this kind of knowledge about virtue, which is the most important thing. He's convinced that that is the goal of human existence, that the thing you should cherish above wealth, certainly, and the other external goods, is the perfection of one's soul through virtue. And yet, here's the conundrum in our existence, is that none of us have the expertise in that greatest of goods that one might find, one might think quite necessary to have this perfection of soul. In any case, why so many of us in our lives have been so moved by the apology is that it has represented the philosophical way of life so forcefully and manfully, as I put in the question. That is there a way to understand the philosophical path as the most important way to live life, as the even though it seems so contrary to the world's estimation of what it means to have a successful or a worthwhile existence, to think about how one stands to the divine commission to know oneself as limited, to know or to pursue what it means that we should have nothing in excess, that there are limits and that we need to try to understand those limits, that knowing what we have to deal with in terms of our limitations is essential to a happy life, a flourishing human existence, as opposed to living life heedlessly, just going forward according to the well-worn paths that the world has laid out for us, or according to the impulses of one's temperament without any thoughtfulness about that. What we have in the Apology is a vigorous presentation of an existential dynamism that is still the great alternative to the ways of the world, along with, of course, the religious way of life. And so we need to think about that triangle: religious way of life, the philosophical way of life, and then the worldly way.
Is it outrageous for Socrates to compare his courage to that of Achilles? What commission is he manfully living out? Is Socrates pious? What constitutes human wisdom? What does wisdom require each human to do with his or her life? In problematizing the pursuit of worldly goods, does Socratic puzzlement render political, creative, commercial, and domestic activity unsustainable? How is Socrates good for the city? Should we fear death? How might it be a greater good to submit to an unjust death rather than to escape such a death unjustly?
Unjustly here would be very closely related to shamefully, and that's one of the other key words here is what is shameful as far as what it would take to be to defend one's whole life. If you were to think about yourself as called to account for the way you've lived your life so far, how would you go about it? If you did it like Socrates, could one plausibly say, as some scholars say, well, he was trying to provoke the jury, the 400 to 500 jurors, he was trying to provoke them to kill him because it was basically an act of suicide. Again, I don't find that plausible at all, but one could argue that. Okay, that would require saying, well, I would do it differently, maybe, unless one is suicidal, right? If you were called to account for your life, would it look like this? Would it look like, well, he criticizes the flatterers. I mean, it's easy to say, well, is that the way to go? I'm going to beg and plead and pull on the heartstrings in the ways that we know would move people. Or would we be like narcissists and just say, I judge you, I condemn you? I mean, I think Socrates, if I submit that if you look at what he's doing as a whole, he's not pandering, he's not needlessly needling. I think he's just being a man of integrity. I mean, this what I find here is a portrait of complete integrity. That's part of, I guess, why I find it so moving.